Google for? Google knows. The CIA's ISP knows. A lot of Tier 1 ISPs in the middle know. I guess that means AT&T knows, and I guess if we believe the news, that means NSA knows. What other organizations out there can keep track of this sort of thing? And does the CIA really want to broadcast all of that? So those are a few examples. The basic idea here is you can't get anonymity by yourself. If we just had the cancer survivor anonymity system, then it wouldn't work, because everybody coming out of it, you'd know what they were using it for. So the goal is to take all these different groups and blend them into the same system so that they can get security with each other. So far, so good? Okay. And yes, bad people need anonymity too. But if they're willing to break the law, they can get much better anonymity than Tor can give them. If you're willing to break the law, you should steal a cell phone and use it and throw it in a ditch. You should break into computers in Korea and China and Idaho and route through them. In fact, there's a whole taxonomy of bad people on the internet. This is a separate talk that we could get into. But the basic idea is you start with your Trojans and your viruses and your exploits, and from there you build your bot networks or your zombie networks. And these are made up of cable modems and other systems around the US and Europe, just random people mostly running Windows, vulnerable to all sorts of things. And once you've got your set of 100,000 or 1 million compromised computers, then you profit. You do all sorts of things. Espionage, DDoS, extortion. We hear stories periodically about casinos in the Caribbean where they're making a lot of money online, and some guy shows up and knocks them off the network for 4 hours. And then he stops, and they come back up, and he sends them a polite mail saying, yeah, that was me. Here's my Swiss bank account. I want 10 million US, or I'm going to do it again. And they do the math, and the math says 10 million's cheap compared to going off the network for a week, so sounds good. And it turns out that $10 million goes a long way in Russia. So these guys are, it's a great business model for them. And then spam and phishing and so on. If you've ever gotten mail saying guaranteed bulletproof hosting, the way that works is they set up your website on 1,000 cable modem computers around the US. And so 10 of them get cleaned up. Who cares? There are still plenty more. So that's a separate talk. But if you're willing to break the law, bad people on the internet, they're doing fine. They've got great opportunities for anonymity, whereas the good guys, individuals, corporations, law enforcement, government, they don't have very many options. So bad guys are doing great, good guys have nothing. That's what we're trying to fix. IP addresses are fine identifiers. I shouldn't have to say this, but I figure it's worth repeating. If you come from a specific IP address and you visit some hot linked ad with DoubleClick, and then you log into your Amazon account and look at car racing, and then you go to Wikipedia and you post about jump roping and astrophysics, pretty quickly you're building a profile of what sort of person you are. And we can imagine combining these with brick and mortar profiles of various databases people have, and maybe you can identify what state they're from, or maybe even more details than that. I shouldn't have to say that IP addresses are a fine identifier, but I was at a talk that Google was giving to a bunch of CIA folks a few years ago. And at the end of the talk, one of the CIA people said, so do you collect any information about the people who use Google? And with a perfectly straight face, the vice president of whoever she was said, no, we don't collect any personally identifying information. It's not like we collect your name or your phone number. We just collect your IP address. And about half of the people in the audience said, oh, good, great, thanks. That's what I wanted to know. And about half of the people in the audience said, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not sure I like that answer. And I was actually chatting with some folks who were working on a new bill for the U.S. Periodically, people are working on laws saying that it's illegal to help China oppress their citizens and stuff like that. And turns out there's a legal definition of personally identifying information, and it excludes IP address. So the woman at Google was telling the truth. They don't collect any personally identifying information. They just collect your IP address. I don't know if that means the law should change at some point so it reflects reality, or I guess we'll find out how that works down the road. Okay, so that was the first half. That was who uses this stuff and why and what do they care about. The second half is more of a how do we actually build one of these and what are the problems there. So we're not the first anonymity system out there. There are a bunch of other systems. Probably the key point here is the dotted line, the low latency versus high latency. In a low latency anonymity system, the goal is to get the traffic from the web browser to the web server or vice versa pretty quickly. If you want to instant message or web browse, you want to do it such that the traffic gets from one end of the network to the other pretty quickly so the user doesn't get upset and leave. Whereas in a high latency system, you're able to, maybe it's for email or something, and the user is willing to wait 3 or 4 hours before the mail arrives. In a high latency system, theoretically, you can get a lot higher security because you're delaying these messages and batching and reordering and stuff. Whereas in a low latency system, the amount of theoretical security we can get isn't as strong. So the key difference is what's called the end-to-end correlation attack. The key difference is in a low latency system, there's a certain attack, a timing attack that works pretty well. The idea is if I'm watching Alice's connection and I'm watching Bob's connection, I see something come out of Bob and I see something very similar arrive at Alice half a second later. And if I watch these things back and forth for a little while, I can become pretty convinced that, in fact, Bob is talking to Alice and Alice is talking to Bob. So for a low latency system, we give up on that attack. We accept that attack. And that's because if we want to make the attack not work, we need to add, this is still an open research question, but we theorize that we need to add so much latency and so much overhead that it won't be a low latency anymore. So on the other hand, for a high latency system, the goal is even if you're watching Alice and Bob, the stuff you see coming out of Bob is not obviously correlatable to the stuff you see going into Alice. And the reason that is because you're willing to wait several hours, and maybe 100 people have sent email over the course of those several hours. So you're not sure which of those 100 are the ones that line up. So why do we focus on low latency then if there's this horrible attack? The answer is it comes down to the number of users. How many people in the world are willing would like to have better privacy, better anonymity, better security for their web browsing? Many millions of people. How many people in the world are willing to wait 4 hours for their email to maybe arrive? Turns out not very many. So even though the high latency systems are, in theory, more secure, in theory they can provide better security, if you don't have any users, then in practice you're not going to have the anonymity set. You're not going to be able to provide the security. So we're not choosing between a fast system with low security and a slow system with high security. We're choosing between fast and slow with low security in both cases. And that makes the choice easier. Go where the users are. Anonymity loves company. Okay, so how do we build one of these? The easy answer is you get a computer, you set it up somewhere, maybe in San Diego, and you route all the traffic through it. So Alice 1 is showing up saying, please give me the front page of Voice of America. And Alice 2 shows up and says, please show me indie media. And the relay takes all those questions, goes to the websites, fetches the answer, and hands them back. And that's great. It's easy to set up. It's easy to understand. But what if there's an attacker anywhere in the system? Maybe there's an attacker watching Alice 3's network. And he watches Alice 3 say, dear relay, please send me this page from this website. So that's no good, because now there's a single place on the network where you can go to learn what Alice is doing, to link Alice to Bob. So we use encryption. And now there's an SSL connection from Alice to the relay, and it doesn't matter if you're watching that connection, you still can't read the actual bytes that they're sending back and forth. And this is how most commercial proxies work. But there's still a problem here. What about that big central point of failure in the middle? What happens if you go and you bribe the janitor, or you pay them $20, or you send a subpoena, or you send a guy named Guido on an airplane, or maybe you get a job as the janitor, or you go look at the wires going in and out of the building. The list goes on in terms of how a central point of failure might be a bad move for anonymity. And you can also eavesdrop the system. If you can get a hold of the network connection, you can see the packets coming in, you can see the packets going out, and you can line them all up. One place is good enough to break the whole thing. So the goal for Tor is distributed trust. The idea is to spread out the connection